Cable management, it does take a lot of work to get it right, but it's worth it, okay? And in this video, I'm going to show you some of my tips and tricks, and we're going to start with a Skywatcher Adventurer Pro, and we'll finish with a fairly significant rig like this. Alright, so first, let's give you an overview of what's going on here with this. Typically, these are just trackers, but this one is actually guided, so that's a little bit of extra complication there. But we're going to start with the top, okay, because this is the three minimums that you're going to have. So, I actually have two cables going into the camera. One of them is going to the battery grip. This right here is a 9-volt DC 5 amp, which I bought off of eBay. And it's like a $27 item, but this keeps my camera powered. It also allows me to remove all batteries from the camera, and it lightens the camera up significantly. So this might look like a pretty heavy camera, but it's actually pretty light considering what it is. The second cable right here, this is a USB-C. It's the cable that came with the camera, okay? And from this, it comes down here, goes out through my USB extension, and it goes to the laptop, and I control the camera using Olympus Capture. Now, the reason why this is actually over this like a hook is actually to decrease the weight of all these cables, because the number one thing that's important about cable management is that you keep your cables as light as possible. You don't want the entire cable hanging off of a port either in the camera or on the mount, okay? And that brings me to another thing here, is that Olympus has been sending their Pro line cameras, the EM1 series, with this little clip that goes into the neck strap on your camera. And don't throw these out, keep them. They're very handy, and what it does is it takes all the strain off of the ports on your camera. Now, the third cable that we have here, this is actually a USB powered dew heater for the lens, and in the summertime this is pretty essential. Wintertime, not so much. Alright, so you're probably wondering, okay, what's the ZWO camera? This is a second camera essentially, and what this does is it watches the star, and if that star moves, it will send pulses to the mount, or the Skywatcher Adventurer Pro here in this case, and it will actually correct for things that might be inconsistencies in the speed with which it tracks the sky. Something like this allows you to go from maybe a 1 or 2 minute exposure at max with something like this using a wide angle lens to as much as a 10 or even 20 minute exposure without getting any star trails whatsoever. So this is kind of a more advanced thing, but it's hugely worth it, okay? And adding something like this to your rig really doesn't cost that much. I'm using the original ZWO ASI Air because it doesn't need an external Wi-Fi antenna attached to it, which would be one more thing to connect in, and one more cable too, by the way. But I'm basically using a battery pack. So this is a USB powered battery pack, which is really designed for charging something like an iPhone, okay? But it actually does power my USB powered dew heater, okay? And also, it will also power my ZWO Air, okay? So it kind of keeps a couple more things off the ground essentially. Now this guy right here, this is basically Conduit. Now typically, I like cable organizing Conduit, but I like it in white. This is black, it's all I had in this size. Usually 3/8 inch is a good size, another good size is 1/2 inch, and I do use some 5/8 on the big mount. But one thing you want to watch with this is the weight. There's a lot of weight here, and so what I often do is once I've started my session, I just find like a lever or something like that right here, and I hook it up here basically to kind of get weight off of the camera. And now what's something like this doing up here? This tripod head right here is actually temporary. It's going to get replaced with something lighter. But what we do is we actually point it at, well, the North Pole first, and we get our polar alignment using plate solving in the ASI Air, and then we'll turn around and we'll point it at approximately the part of the sky where the main imaging camera is pointed, and that'll give us really, really great images. Now, some other things that I have down here, these are some zip ties that just kind of, basically I'm looping the cords up and just getting them out of the way, out of the mess, so that there is actually no weight hanging off the guide port on the mount itself. And the same thing with the one cord that's coming into the ASI Air, which is also going up to the camera. We've also got that lassoed right here so that there's no weight on the actual ASI Air itself. because these ports are, you know, they're delicate. They're just attached to the motherboard, and if they get a lot of tugging on them, it will wear them out and break them eventually. All right, so the big rig. This has a lot more going on here, and I'll tell you, I've probably spent at least 10 hours working on the different cables throughout the many different iterations of this scope that I've had, and always making improvements here and there. And it takes a lot of work, but it really is worth it, because if you don't get a snag at night, it means that your imaging session just goes flawlessly. I can set this up at night and go to bed, and it will do its thing all night long. Now, this is the type of conduit cable organizer that I like the most. It's white. These are 3/4 inch, and I think this guy here is either 1/2 inch or 5/8. I find 5/8, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch. 3/4 inch works great if you're going to take the wire and loop it back and forth a couple times. Like, you can actually see half of this sticking out here. This is a DC cord that I had, which was just too long, and so I just basically looped it back and forth. And also, there are these foam tape backed zip tie attachments, which I can give you a link for this on the web. And basically, these are great because it gets the weight of all of this off the camera and off the ASI Air. We're attaching it to something else. It's not hanging off of any of these these ports. Also, any of the cables that are going into an essential port, you'll notice that there's a little bit of slack in between where I attach them and where they actually go into an item or piece of hardware that's essential. Here we're at the base. So this basically is the power that comes into the scope. Don't hang this off your scope. These are heavy, for crying out loud. I've got it Velcroed right there, up as high as I can get it, and then I've got a bunch of extra cable, and what I usually do is I just kind of loop it over this right here so that it just takes some of the weight off of it. And I did put some electrical tape around this to kind of keep it together, but if there is a major issue and there's a big snag, this will pull apart, and I've actually had that happen. So even right here, this is the back side of the scope. So this is the USB to phone cord, or RS232 port. So I've seen a lot of guys, they just leave the cord hanging all the way to the background and coming back up and then connected into here. And this is a really bad habit, because these little phone type connectors, they're very delicate, they break easily. So get the weight off of them. You can see here I've actually got it all spooled up right here, and all of the weight of the cord is on this part, not this connector. All right, and then this is also just connected with some Velcro to the top of it, and then it runs up here through this here conduit, so that I basically just have all of my connections that go to the ground up to the scope are just run through one single piece of conduit. So this is that little zip tie connector that I was talking about. Right now I'm just using a piece of wire, but you can throw a zip tie through here and connect it to just about anything. I've actually got a couple of these now, and I'll probably start scattering them around the place, but it's just a great way to get the weight of your cable off of the ports on either the ASI Air Pro or your camera. This is a pretty essential addition to an ASI Air Pro, because the aluminum bodies on these render the Wi-Fi that's built into them. The range is essentially about 5 feet. You kind of need one of these. And this is just attached with Velcro, okay? And I've got the antennas at a 45-degree angle to each other, or that's 90 degrees, sorry. And on top of that, this right here is actually a male-to-male connector, which then gets me into this port right here. And this was something I ordered. Why? Because I didn't want a 3-foot long cable that I'd have to loop up and then stick into the air. Really, if you can find a cable that's just long enough, that is the way to go, because it reduces the weight on all of your equipment, and it just means that there's fewer things to go wrong. So this is the USB and DC power that comes off the focuser. These are just little Velcro cable organizers. You can find these on Amazon pretty easily. I would say get a big roll of these things, because you'll use them all the time and just about everywhere. Now this is conduit, which, as you can see, the USB to this it's actually about 2 feet long, but I've got it looped in here once and then back, basically to get it up and to get it as close to the camera as possible That way it's not hanging down, because if it's hanging down, it could snag on something and get yanked out, and that could break a USB port on your camera, which would not be good news. In summary, in closing, a couple major tips. One, make sure the weight of your cables are off of the ports themselves and that they're supported. Try to get white conduit, white zip ties, white adhesive, white Velcro. It's easier to see at night, okay? And you can see if something's wrong fairly quickly if it's white. If it's black, blends into everything. I don't like black scopes. I own one. And then get these little foam connecting zip tie connectors. Those are great to kind of get weight off of your cables. And also, like, have a backup plan. Make sure there's a little bit of slack between your cable connection to where it's anchored and then where it actually connects to either your camera or your ASI Air. That'll protect your equipment and just give you, you know, a worry and trouble-free night.